Today we're going to be discussing totalitarianism and fascism. Um, Fascism is a form of socialism. Totalitarianism is really just where the leader assumes and the government assumes total control over everything. And so we're going to look at how they accomplish their goals. The 1920s is where you're going to see fascism really begin to take a foothold throughout Europe. You're going to see the two main stays are going to be in Germany and Italy. Now, eventually, you're going to see um, the Spanish also join in with the leader Francisco Franco, but he'll come in later, and he was more of a totalitarian than a fascist, and so he had some support from Italy and Germany, but he never really went that full road, if you will, to socialism. But to start off, first person you're going to want to write down, and I'll throw this in the chat so that anyone who doesn't know how to spell it, you can have it. It's Joseph Goebbels. Hold on, make sure I spell this right for you. All right. This guy was directly responsible for all the propaganda you're going to see. In the I think it was like 1924, he joins the Socialist Party, and he becomes infatuated with Hitler. And infatuated is the correct word. Basically was in love with the guy. Everything that he did, every time Hitler spoke, Goebbels was just like eating it all up, and he was following after him. And, oh, this guy's amazing. And so Joseph Goebbels was the leader of the propaganda movement. And he did a lot of things that were revolutionary, I guess, in the terms of propaganda. Sometimes he would make posters with bright red letters, and anything that's red tends to call our attention to it immediately. And in fine print, he would always write out exactly what the poster was referencing. And so by doing this, it got people's attention. Now, fascism really didn't start gaining power in Germany until the Great Depression. So 1929, 1930 is when they really saw a big boom. The two main cities that they controlled were Munich and also, oh, shoot. Well, it doesn't matter. But there was two cities, and it was two of the larger cities in Germany. And so he became more and more prominent the more successful his propaganda was. And by 1932, they controlled really most of the power in Germany, and they were able to do basically anything that they wanted to. And so Joseph Goebbels was highly instrumental in all of this. He was responsible for the use of film. One of the things that you should know about Hitler is the man loved movies. In fact, at this point in history, the greatest movies came out of Germany and not Hollywood. In fact, Hollywood was a rinky-dink town at this point and really hadn't done much. And I think the center of production for movies in the United States was actually on the East Coast and not in Hollywood, California. And so the best movies in the world came from Germany, and Hitler wanted to keep that tradition alive whenever he came to power in 1933. And Joseph Goebbels used movies very effectively to get people to identify with the fascist cause, with the Nazi cause, but also just to get their message out there in general. One of the things to note is that he created a movie one time, and it's going to sound weird and strange, but in this movie, literally, he would show images of Jewish people. And they had distinctly identified Jews by wearing the Star of David on their clothing, and they had to sew it on there. And so he would show pictures of Jewish families or Jewish people in general, and then he would flash to a video of a bunch of rats running through a sewer, and I mean hundreds of rats. And you may say, well, what does that matter? Well, throughout the movie, it's constantly, downgrading the Jewish people, showing pictures of them and then showing pictures of rats, showing pictures of them and then showing pictures of these rats running through tunnels. And you've got to understand that if there's one thing humans associate with rats, it's like disgusting, filthy, disease-ridden things you don't want around. And this became one of many films that Hitler would use to get the German people to dislike the Jews more and more. Now, if you remember before, anti-Semitism in Germany is not a brand new thing. It's not something that came out of nowhere and is like, oh my, what is this? It's been around since the 1870s. You weren't cool unless you were anti-Semitic, at least in words, and you didn't necessarily have to be in actions. And so Joseph Goebbels would take this further and further, and more of the German people would become not like they didn't hate them. The average German person didn't hate the Jews, but they also didn't care about them at all. So whenever they saw them being paraded through their town and seeing their businesses taken away and seeing their homes taken away, they didn't care. He had literally dehumanized Jews in the German mind with the use of these videos. Another name that you'll want to know, and again, I'll throw this in the chat as well, is another person who she was actually very, her name's a little bit harder to spell. She was very instrumental in movie making, and she was actually a famous actress up to this point, is Leni Riefenstahl. She actually directed the two most popular films that were created for the Nazi propaganda movement. And in fact, these films won awards in Germany, France, the United States, England, and there was a fifth country that I can't remember off the top of my head. But Leni Riefenstahl was considered one of the greatest directors of these films. And she actually, her fame and fortune skyrocketed. And after 1945, kind of went downhill because, well, she was associated with making these Nazi propaganda films. And now none of her films downgraded the Jews. None of her films dehumanized them in any way, shape, or form. But hers was just lifting up the Nazi ideals and showing Hitler to be like this amazing power and this awesome person. And he's going to lead Germany out of this terrible time and into this golden age of Aryan dominance, if you will. And in fact, the most famous film that she shot was shot the day after, and Naaman will appreciate this, the Night of a Thousand Knives. And they basically, Hitler did away with a group known as the SA, who was a paramilitary force that had been used in Germany for years, so that he could prop up the SS, which most of you should know what the SS is. It's basically a secret police force that Hitler used to wipe out any opposition to his power in Germany. And it was very not good stuff happening with the SS. If you don't know anything about them, I highly encourage that you look them up. These guys were awful in everything, and they were the ones who were basically responsible for carrying out the Holocaust in general. And so, but that's that group, and that's not something we really need to talk about today, anyways. And other things that were done propaganda-wise, besides making movies and besides doing different things, they would actually change the architecture of their country, and it's known as essentially like fascist architecture. And the goal of fascist architecture was to show power, but also to show unity for the people. And so a lot of times they would include, like on building fronts, they would have a facade there that would, in Spain, it depicted Francisco Franco's victory, and there was some words about it and some pictures of him. And in Italy, it pictured Mussolini's victories and his awesome, leadership. And same thing in Germany for Hitler. And so these new forms of architecture came around. I can't really show you guys a lot of pictures of it, though, because, well, the fascist powers lost World War II. And so most of these countries wanted to get rid of any sort of memory of these fascist regimes. And so once Mussolini was out of power, once Hitler was out of power, their citizens went around and basically destroyed all of this type of architecture, getting rid of any sort of mention of these guys possible. And so, but architecture was one way that they used propaganda as well. Now, what you really, really need to buckle down for is we're going to talk about Stalin here, and we're going to talk about that totalitarianism that came through communism. And the way that he practiced his totalitarianism was known as a 5-year plan. I'm not sure if any of you have like a background in understanding this point in history and the 5-year plans. But in total, the Soviet Union would introduce 13 5-year plans and all together. And all of these plans, for the most part, never accomplished what they set out to accomplish. Big surprise there, communism at its finest. But the first one was geared, it started in 1928, and it was geared towards collectivizing all industry. And literally it was taking Russia from their feudalist ideals and small farms and lack of industrialization and taking them into the 21st century, essentially. And what this did is they collectivized the farms. So in other words, all the farms were put under Soviet control. So no longer would you have what we would call a mom and pop farm. So like a family farm, if you will. No longer would you see that. The Russian government would control it from this point forward. And you'd also have the making of a ton of factories. And problems that this is going to cause is from 1932 to 1933, there was a massive famine. And best estimates are it killed anywhere between 3.3 and 7 million Russian citizens. Soviet Union citizens, because they're no longer Russia at this point. So there was a terrible cost of life throughout all of this in collectivizing the farms. And I mean, I've told some of you the story before. Government can't control everywhere, especially in a large area. You look at the needs, look at the United States. The needs of New York are extremely different from the needs of, say, South Carolina, or you can even go to Oklahoma. Those are different areas. And if the US government were to come in and completely run all of them the same way, you're going to run into problems, and there will be some issues. Different things happen in different areas. And so whenever Stalin comes in and collectivizes all of this, and whenever he says, you know what, we're going to have complete control, we're going to do it my way, you basically have a massive famine. And by the way, these 5-year plans of Stalin, he's going to run 5 of them before he dies. And he's basically going to be responsible for killing in the neighborhood of 25 million people with all of these plans. It's not good in those terms. And so these 5-year plans are just an example of the totalitarian ideals of these people and how they're going to control everything as they go along. And it's not going to go well. In fact, it's one of the things is that Stalin's going to do is he's going to commit what's known as the Great Purge. Essentially, there's a group of people in Russia known as the kulaks. And by the way, this isn't the only group that was targeted. There were some Polish people that were targeted during this time period, Ukrainian people. But the kulaks are the ones that I want you to at least have heard of. Kulak is K-U-L-A-K, by the way. And this group of people are known as wealthy peasants. It sounds odd, but essentially these people owned 8 acres of land. And remember, whenever you're in an agrarian society, what equals wealth? That's land. And so these people had 8 acres of land. And so they were wealthy, poor people. Didn't have a lot to their name, but they had land that they could sell. And these people kind of resisted Stalin's changes. And he literally said, well, since they're resisting my changes to collectivize the farms and to bring them all under Soviet control, since they're rejecting all of this, they're essentially declaring war on the Soviet Union. And because they're declaring war on the Soviet Union, we're going to give them war. And he sent out an order to all of the regions that he controlled, to all of his governors, and said, okay, I want you to put together a list of all the kulaks who are against the collectivization of the farms and against what the Soviet Union's trying to accomplish. And I want you to give that list to me. And they had like 5 days to get it to him. I think all the governors got it to him in 3 days, you know, because they're terrified of this guy. And they got him all the names, and within a week, there was a systematic purge of all of these kulaks. You're talking millions dead because they didn't want to go along with Stalin's ideals and everything that he wanted. Now, his first 5-year plan to collectivize all of the industry and the farms, he was able to bring them into a more industrialized nation. In fact, by the end of the first 5-year plan, although it cost somewhere in the neighborhood of over 10 million lives, they were second in the world in industrialization. So they were actually able to make some headway in that. I think before this, they were somewhere in the neighborhood of 5th or 6th. Problem was, most of the stuff that they made was unusable. It was so poorly crafted, it was so poorly made that they couldn't do anything with it. They would break. And so while they were making a lot of stuff, they weren't making anything that was of quality. And so they couldn't sell it to other countries. And so what that does is it actually creates an even poorer economy in a bad time to begin with, because the first 5-year plan started in 1928 and was done by 1933. And obviously that's during the Great Depression, so things aren't going well anyways with money. And so the second 5-year plan, the third 5-year plan, and so on and so forth, is aimed at fixing that. And how do they fix that? Well, they do what every good Soviet leader does. They build their military. Well, really any fascist socialist leader does. They begin to build their military, and they forcibly close shops for non-essential items, and they force them to make wartime items, whether it be tanks, bombs, whatever. And so that's one way that he tries to fix it. And again, one of the things that you're going to run into is still, even after this, the Russian industry is going to be subpar to everything else in the world, whether it's German weapons, whether it's U.S. weapons. The Russians will always fall behind them. They were very poor at making guns. You should look up, if you're interested, looking up the history of Russian weapons, especially during World War II. They were not good. They relied very heavily on U.S. weapons to be sent to them. And German weapons were actually very good at this time as well. They at least did a good job, so kudos to Hitler for that. In fact, one of the most famous pistols was made under Hitler's command, and yeah, people love that thing. Very powerful. Now, Stalin was, like I said, he not 5-year plans actually caused the deaths of many millions of his own people, lots of famines as a result, killed people in Ukraine. He killed people in Poland. Anyone who he thought was not worthy of being ruled by Russia, or the Soviet Union, I should say, had a mark put on them. He was responsible for really committing genocide against certain people groups. You know, we look at Hitler and we say, oh, the Holocaust and 6 million people dead, and actually it was more than that, 6 million Jews, and then you have another, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million other people groups were involved there. But Stalin was actually far worse. He actually killed more people because of their race than Hitler did, but Hitler is demonized more because Stalin was a ally of the West during World War II, and Hitler was not. So Hitler is indemnified and Stalin's given a pass. But honestly, when you look at the numbers, Hitler was responsible for the death of around 7 million people. Stalin tripled that easily. There are estimates ranging between he's responsible for, at minimum, the death of 25 million people during his reign, and there are estimates as high as 100 million. That's a wide gap. That means these people died. We're not sure if Stalin was responsible, but he might be. And that's a crazy amount. And so Stalin was very totalitarian. He had complete control, and if you ever stood up against him, sorry. If he didn't outright kill you, one of the things that he would use was a gulag. And I'm not sure if you guys know what a gulag is, but it's basically a terrible prison. Medieval prisons were better than these things. And essentially, if you went to a gulag, you had about a 95% death rate. You were going to die there. Or he would send you to everyone's favorite vacation destination, Siberia. Everyone loves Siberia. It's one of the greatest things in the world. And so Duolingo uses those. Okay. I didn't mean to do that. We're going to X out of that. All right. So any questions? And I'm going to unmute you all right now. So do you guys have any questions for me? So how do you feel about fascism and totalitarianism? Good times, right? Francisco Franco, I mean, I didn't really mention him too much, but Francisco Franco was, he was in Spain, and he led a revolt, and it was basically a Spanish Civil War. Italy and Germany helped him. The United States and the West kind of stayed out of it because he wasn't a socialist, and so we didn't really care. In fact, he ended up becoming a major ally later on, and by the 1950s, he wasn't even really considered a totalitarian. He began to allow other people to help lead, and so Francisco Franco is just an interesting character. He started out totalitarian and then kind of fell off that horse, and he would rule in Spain until 1974, 1975, something like that.
I think it's 75. I don't really remember.
I just know it's the middle of the 1970s, so I didn't look up an exact date. But yeah, so Franco wasn't responsible for the death of many people.
Yeah, the Spanish Civil War was between him and a socialist, so a lot of people just went for him.
Yeah, well, one of the things that always confused me, and I haven't done a whole lot of research into this Spanish Civil War in general, because it wasn't really much of a war to begin with, was why Italy and Germany would side with him over the socialists. So it's just one of those things. I'm wondering if there was just something wrong with this guy, like from the outset, something really wrong with him.
When I was looking this up for, some of our cause and effect stuff, I found that the socialist dude was actually part of the Popular Front, so that's pretty fun.
Yeah, there was a lot of popular fronts. There was a Popular Front of France, Italy, Germany. And by the way, the Popular Front is just a movement of socialism.
Yeah.
They were the popular vote. It's kind of like Bernie Sanders running around and the popular vote.
Honestly, it's really bad.
So
don't waste it.
You want to eat these two? Because these are honestly.
All right, so mute that. All right, so any questions? How's everybody doing?
Yeah, quarantine.
My birthday's tomorrow.
Whose birthday's tomorrow?
Michaela's.
Oh, Michaela. Happy birthday to you.
Chris Lee was there, I guess.
Nope. All right. Well, what are you going to do for your birthday, Michaela, besides stay inside?
I don't know. I'm gonna sleep and do homework probably.
All right. So real quick, I'm going to write these in the chat, but I'm going to say them out loud for anyone who's going to be watching this later on. A couple of things I want you to look up. The Nazi Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. right? Yeah, I spelled it right. All right, so the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact is one thing I want you to look up and add to your cause and effect link. And you know what? We're going to give you something you've never heard of, or I doubt you've ever heard of. It's the Munich Agreement. So look up those two things, add those to your cause and effect, and we'll talk about those. I think our next meeting, I have it scheduled for Thursday. I'll have to check again, but I'll post it in the Google Classroom and get it for you. If you don't have any questions, I'm done. Everybody getting their work done?
Try.
Trying? Well, hopefully mine's not too bad. That's the only thing I'm trying to do is let you learn, but not make it too difficult.
The LEQ.
Huh?
What's the deal with the LEQ?
Oh, the LEQ. I copied and pasted, or at least I thought I did, and then it didn't change it. And so when I posted it, it posted the same one you got last week. So after this, I'm going to go in and I'm going to put the new one in. The new one's going to come from Unit 2, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. That's really fun.
So we'll have the LEQ. We're probably going to do one LEQ every week and one short answer every week. So beginning of the week, we'll give 2 days to do an LEQ, and then the end of the week, there will be 2 days to do a short answer question. But yeah, shouldn't be too bad. Any other questions? All right. Well, if not, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. So nice seeing you all. We'll see you later.